So our presenter today is Dave Loyal from Loyal Drums. Many of you know Dave already, but I'll just give him a quick intro. He's a native of Virginia. He's been a long-standing member of the fife and drum community. He's an alumni of the Company of Fifers and Drummers Junior Camp, where he met his wife, Kara. Dave served 11 years as a staff sergeant with the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. And has performed internationally with the Middlesex County Volunteers. I'm very, very proud to say that he's currently performing with my corps, the Grand Republic Fife and Drum Corps. I will tell you, aside from his drum making ability, Dave is one of the finest drummers that I know. So I'm very pleased that he's in the situation he's in right now. He's had a long-standing commitment to education. He's provided workshops and seminars for the Percussive Arts Society, for United States Association of Rudimental Drummers, for the Society of International Rudimental Drummers, SIRD. He's on the teaching staff at the Don Hubbard Field Music School and the National Civil War Field Music School, or has been at different times. You all likely became aware of Loyal Drums as a company when Dave introduced his premier line of drum slings. I would imagine many of you have those. And in 2018, Dave and Cooperman entered an agreement that allowed Loyal Drums to take the Cooperman rope drums into the future. So we're with Dave today in his shop. He's been busy since 2018 making drum slings and the military equipment he's been known for. He's been building his team. Some of his team is here. He spent a lot of time doing R&D, trying to improve his product and his process. He's had a second child, and most germane to our discussion today, he's serviced lots and lots of drums, especially in the recent inauguration. Maybe Dave will share some of his experiences with us. Dave, were there any drums in the parade that you didn't work on? I'd like to know, but without further ado, today's drum maintenance and optimization workshop will address the basic things that will make 95% of the drums out there sound better. Tension, snares, head thickness, muffling, and drum first aid. And hopefully we won't get Dave first aid if he stops drilling in his while he's holding things. So without further ado, take it away, Dave.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you very much for those words, Scott. I'm extremely humbled by all that stuff. So thank you very much. Hopefully it's all true. I don't know, but we're going to cover a lot of different things today. The idea is to share some of my experiences. For the last 3 years since we took over the rope drums from Cooperman. I mean, it's just been a crazy time of getting stuff, figured out, built the whole shop space and all that. So there's been a lot doing this every day, all day, 5, sometimes 6, sometimes even 7 days a week. We've kind of figured out a lot of things, and a lot of it's standing on the shoulders of others as well. While I was in the Old Guard, I was the drum shop guy for about 10 years. And that has a very specific need for maintaining those instruments. It was about like 20 instruments or so. And we had roughly 600 performances a year, sometimes even more. So you can imagine those drums were getting played all the time. And it gave us a unique insight into what can go wrong on a drum, how to fix it, and some of the best practices for how to maintain those instruments. When I first came to the Old Guard, Matt LeBombard was in the shop. And if you guys know Matt, he's a very handy guy and a very intelligent guy. So he and I work together on a lot of this. So a lot of stuff comes from him, comes from different people. I don't make a whole lot of stuff up myself. It's either adapted from something or a few of the things we've come across by accident. But if you have any questions about any of these techniques, I do talk about them quite a bit. And for other people in the shop, we train them up for all these things as well. So if you have a question that I don't know the answer to, we can try to figure it out together. But so let's see, I'm just going down here. So this isn't going to be an all-inclusive class on everything there is to do for a drum. That would take us hours, months, a year. There's too much going on with that. So what I'd like to do is kind of give people from corps directors down to individual players, maintenance personnel for military, people who are going to be working with these drums quite a bit, a better understanding of the way that the drum functions, the way that the drum works, and some things that you can do to optimize that. So without further ado, I just want to mention that I always start out a little nervous with these things until I realize that it doesn't really matter, and I do this every day. So if I'm a little nervous at first, that's why. So what we're going to start off with is talking about some of the elements of rope work and things that happen before you assemble the drum, before you put the drum together. So there's a few things that I have here and some tricks that I do want to show you. I have a table here, so hopefully we can see some things. Here are all my notes in mini for me. So I want to start off with ropes, okay? There's generally two different types of ropes that we're using in the drum shop. There's all sorts of variations of materials for these ropes, but the two basic things I want to cover, which should cover almost everything, would be a twisted rope and a woven rope, right? Both of these are phenomenal ropes. This one's a Swiss Kevlar core rope, which is more or less a standard for us. This is our professional drum rope 2.0, which is custom made for us in France, actually. So, and they vary a lot from some of the ropes that you guys might currently have on your drums. Most people are going to have filament Dacron on their drums. That's going to perform as far as the knots in the rope work is going to be the same that we do on this rope, because it's a 3-strand twisted rope. This also goes for 7-strand ropes, 4-strand ropes, if you're into the more historic stuff, the hemp ropes. This is a little bit more contemporary. It's got Kevlar core on the inside. But again, both of these are phenomenal ropes. Filament Dacron, what's common out there, there's two types that we carry, 5/16 and 1/4 inch. The 1/4 inch is, I think it was like a 940 pound test. The way that ropes are kind of measured is how much can it stretch before it breaks. So about 940, 980 pounds for a 1/4 inch filament Dacron, probably 1,200 pounds for the 5/16. Now this stuff, the Kevlar core is about, I think it's about 4,000 to 6,000 pounds, and it's about 8% stretch before it breaks. While this stuff is 16,000 pounds, and it stretches 2% before it breaks. This might sound like I'm kind of geeking out on little rope things, but there's some really cool uses for rope that doesn't stretch. It means that you don't necessarily need a drum press, things like that. We'll get there in the future. But so since most of you are going to have a twisted rope, I do want to demonstrate some of the things that are needed for this rope. One of the biggest things that I see that kind of not ruin a drum, but just make that drum require more maintenance is I see a lot of frayed ropes, especially in the fife and drum community. You'll see a lot of ropes that haven't been sealed correctly. There's a few different methods out there. I know a lot of people would tape their rope, just put a piece of tape around, cut it, and then knock it off there. There's some other fancier ways of actually lashing the rope, which are all fine and good. And then there's melting the rope. We actually melted the rope in the old guard for the longest time, until we were doing a clinic with the Rhine River Rebels. They were at, they came to the old guard building, and we were doing some drum maintenance stuff with them. And due to a miscommunication or a mistranslation, Tobias Ernst, Toby, misunderstood me when I said that we melted into a piece of plastic, and he thought that I was adding something to it, so we immediately went back to the drum shop and found some cyanoacrylate glue, super glue, and I've been doing that ever since. It is the best out there. because these ropes don't melt. Kevlar doesn't melt. This stuff doesn't melt. So you can't actually do that. But so I do want to demonstrate this process. Don't worry, I'm not going to screw up this cutting board, but even if I do, they make them right next door, so this is the reject. So what I use is called 2P10. This isn't a product placement, but just use some sort of super glue. You can use the simple squeeze bottles that they have down at any convenience store, but this stuff works pretty well here in this shop. So what I like to do is on the end that's going to become the loose end that you're not going to be doing the eye-splice on, I open up the rope slightly. If you can see that, it's a little bit open. And then you can just apply some of this glue so that it goes to the inside and along the outside. I'd prefer that people don't glue their fingers to the rope when you do this. You can wear a glove, just make sure it doesn't stick to the glove. And the activator seals that up. Right? So now what you're left with, this is actually already good to go. It's already dry. You can see that if I try to bend it, sorry, my camera is reversed. If I try to bend it, it's a solid piece right there. And that's on the inside and outside. One nice thing about this is that when you do this, it doesn't change the look of the rope. With the old guard, we always had these dark stains on the rope from the heat that we would have to apply to melt the actual material. So this is a much cleaner look, allows you to hide the end of the rope. If I can cut this stuff, it's one of the hardest things to cut. I guess that's what you get for a 16,000 pound test. So I brought all my cutting tools just in case. So you're left with a nice clean end of the rope, right? So I do want to demonstrate the PigTail, or sorry, the eye-splice on the other side. A lot of times it might even work to make this a little bit easier if you wanted to add some glue to the tips of these. It'll make it act more like a needle. I'm not going to go super in depth with the eye-splice. If you're interested in learning how to do this and you don't already know, there's so many videos on YouTube of rope work, but this is, so it's very easy to find that information. So the idea is that you have three cross sections, three strands at any cross section of the rope. So you take the three strands and you open up the rope at, roughly the spot where you want it to bend around to. And then I'm just going to go through this pretty quick. 1, 2, 3. So it's not pretty yet, but you can see each strand goes through a specific, a random strand. It doesn't need to be anyone specifically, but it does need to be in the same plane as if you were to cut across the rope, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. And then it's just a simple weave of going to the next, going over one and going under the next one. Cool. So that's done. It's a nice clean look. It'll last for pretty much forever. What I do is I would cut the ends of this, trim it up. I swear this is going to get more interesting. If I can cut through the rope, even with a sharp Swiss chisel. It's good stuff, I'll tell you. This stuff is incredibly difficult to cut. I'll just leave it like that for now. And I'll trim this up later. This will be fine for the demonstration. So this is what you want to do with all your rope. If it's already tied, if you're using the rope that's already on your drum, then seal the end of it. That's really all that you need to do. And super glue is going to be the best way to do that, that I've found, because it doesn't change the diameter, it doesn't mushroom it out. So it's really easy to work with. So there are a few ways to do this with the woven rope as well. I'm going to show you what I think is probably one of the better ways. And I'm excited about this. It's a new knot that we actually created. A friend of mine, Don Hemenitz, which a lot of you know, I asked him about this knot. I said, hey, what's this knot called? I just kind of figured it out. And he looked through a bunch of the books and he said, you know, I don't think that is a knot. I think that that's a new knot. So this is something that I'm pretty excited about if we can turn it into the loyal drum knot. So the problem with this rope is that there's so many strands that you can't actually splice it into itself. There are ways of doing it where you go inside, but it creates too much distance and it's not ideal for a drum. So what I do on this, the loyal drum knot, which I can demonstrate, and I'll probably do a separate video just on this knot at some point so that I can go more in depth with it. So you have the end and you create this loop with the loose, or I guess the bite end, if we want to use rope terms, we create a slip knot right over, or a half hitch right over, right? And then with the tail end, we follow that curve around and go right back up into itself. So the loyal drum knot, it looks kind of like a figure eight, but it works really well. And it's a nice small knot compared to something like a bowline. And it's easy to do. If somebody has this type of rope, you know, lashing techniques can get pretty in depth, you know. But this is a great technique to get this rope ready to use, and it takes about 15 seconds. So if that, and this would be trimmed and glued. All right, enough talking about rope, Dave. Stop geeking out. So let's see. We talked about the knots. We're going to get to the drag rope and stuff like that when we actually assemble a drum. I think that this is going to be another common thing that is going to be useful for a lot of people, is making their own muffle strip. We sell muffle strips. You can get muffle strips from different places that are pre-made, but this is what we do using for snare drums. Most of the time we're using a 1-inch wide cotton webbing strip. This is 20 inches long and this is 10 inches long. So we have two pieces, and the simplest way to create the muffling strip is to fold it right in half and just crease it with your fingers. Do this on both of them. Okay, so you get a nice little crease there on each one, and then just line them up. Okay, so now you have a double layer. And we go back to our old friend, Crazy Glue, and just a little bit in there. And it gets hot immediately, and it's done. That's on there forever. Now, the thing that I like to do, the reason why we have this second strip is that it actually adds a little bit more vertical pressure against the drum head. So it's going to have more pressure against the drum head, which is a good thing. So we also don't want, when we pull this across the drum, we don't want it to try to break its own bond with the glue. So the way that I do it is we let the top kind of sag a little bit while we pull on the bottom, right? And then I'll just pinch it right there. So now we have, if the bottom gets tensioned, the top is never under that same amount of tension. A little bit of glue. Boom. So if you look at it, it'll be kind of floppy on the top, but as it pulls tight, it's not stressing that glue joint. And then just because we like to make things look nice, the very ends also get folded back with the same glue. So that gives you a little bit of security. So hopefully you won't pull it through underneath the head. And there you go. You have a nice brand new muffle strip. So if you want to make your own, feel free. I won't I won't say anything. But you can do it out of a lot of different materials and a lot of different widths and things like that if you'd like. So, okay, we've done rope, we've done the muffle strip. I do want to talk a little bit about the heads, and this is all just getting ready for putting a drum together. So this is the stuff that we recommend doing. When you get a head, if it's one of the custom heads for the rope drums, they're going to have some numbers and things on the side of them. The easiest way to take that stuff off, we use MEK, which is methyl ethyl ketone. It's also really great at removing logos off of heads if you ever need to, depending on the brand. Some of them use different solvents, but MEK, just wear gloves if you ever use something like that. But so what I like to do, this is a technique for coating or covering the actual aluminum channel here. I don't think it looks very nice personally, having a nice wooden drum with wooden hoops and then having this big piece of raw aluminum just underneath it. So I wanted to do something that could easily be done in the field if somebody needed to. So what we do is we use a professional grade of masking tape. You could use regular masking tape, it's fine. This stuff is just, it's heavier, it's got a stronger bond. This is American brand, PG. It's an auto refinishing tape. But I want to show you how we coat these. So we have a little bit of an overlap on the top. Can you see? Hopefully we can see here. So we can go all the way around the head. We want it to be covered on the top and bottom, and I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, so if you can, yeah. So there's a little bit of an overlap, what will be the top surface of the head, and much more on the bottom. So if we just put a slight angle with our fingers, we're not trying to do everything all at once, we can rotate around the head, which will push it in, and then go a little bit more, a little bit more. Right, until you're right in there. We actually trim these rolls of our tape. Like you can see this one, this is trimmed for a specific head, and this one might be for some of the Swiss heads. But so we actually trim them to be the correct size. Don't ask me how I do it, because I won't show that on camera. Some of you have seen it in person. Corinne wouldn't like it. But I think it's a nice clean look once it's on a hoop. You get a nice clean look against the drum shell. So that's my favorite way to do that, because you can do it in the field. You don't need to have a paint booth and all that stuff. If you get it scratched, you can just replace it without having to buy a whole new head. Let's see. Okay, any questions before we move on to actually start working on the drum itself?
Yeah, Dave, we've had two questions. One is related to the muffle strip. So does the half size piece go up against the head or not?
Yeah, so yes, the half size piece would be on the top, because that's going to give you that additional pressure against the top of the head.
Thank you. And then the other question is related to drum heads, and if there's a better place for this, just let me know. Any advice on restoring and rejuvenating older, dried out calf drum heads? We can push that later, but since you were talking about drum heads.
Yeah, I'll touch on it now. I haven't experimented too much with, we've used old drum heads, but mostly for display drums. I haven't really done much painting, or playing on those drums. But there probably are some, I know that Scott has a bunch of heads from the 1940s, 1950s that he's still using. So I'd be interested to see those. But once a head has been on a drum, especially if it has to be retucked, it starts losing a lot of the natural collagen and the natural glues that are inside of it. So they can get brittle, and it's really hard to put that back in there. Now, I can tell you that I have repaired some calfskin drum heads that have gotten damaged or gotten broken. When we were in Oslo, I was there with the Greycoats, the 21st Greycoats Battalion from Switzerland. I broke a head the first day. We were doing a clinic right before the first show. We had about a week's worth of shows in front of us, and we didn't have any extra calfskin. So I repaired it about a half an hour before the show. It was done with 5-minute epoxy, and it worked out pretty well. Is that ideal? No, I probably would have, if I did it in my shop, I probably would have used hide glue or something like that, because that is the natural collagen that comes out of the skin that holds it together anyway. But they can be repaired and patched. It is possible. It might not work every time, but that's maybe not answering your question exactly, but it's the best I can do at the moment.
Thank you, Dave.
Yep. Cool. So we're going to get ready to start throwing this drum together. This drum right here is for the University of Louisiana, Lafayette. So this is the one that we're going to put together. It's not entirely assembled. I have this bad habit of when a drum gets entirely assembled, it tends to leave the shop pretty quick. So right now, we're going to use it as a demonstration for roping the drum and putting tension on and things like that, but it doesn't have the snare strainer system installed on this one yet. But so that's okay. I'm going to clear off a little bit of space here. And just so the drum looks good, let me just tape this one super quick.
So Dave, if you can talk while you tape, just clarification on that drum head that you repaired. You were talking about the top head that you hit.
Sorry, it was a bass drum. But yeah, it would be possible on a snare drum as well. I know that right now my Grand Republic drum has a split on the side, right on the flesh hoop. It is the snare side head though. So I'm gonna mess around with that before we perform again and see if that split can be repaired in the same way. I do want to try hide glue though, because I do think that it'll be good to have it, consistent with the material that is in the calfskin, right? So, okay, so there's a few things when assembling a drum, and I am going to move the camera here once we actually start going over to the, I've got a drum press next to me and also some space to show you some different methods. But there's a few things that people tend to forget when putting a drum together. One of them is often the muffle strip. There's nothing more infuriating than getting a drum super cranked and tight, and then realizing that you never put a muffle strip in it and that you need to take the whole thing apart. I'm sure most of us have been there before. But so always first things first, the muffle strip. If you have access to an air compressor of some sort, I love to blow out the dust that's accumulated in the drums. Just a little blast really works well to get some of that stuff out of there. But if not, you can use a microfiber cloth. We use these a lot in the shop, not necessarily for cleaning the drums. Sometimes, fingerprints and things like that are good to use something like that. Position 4. Okay, let's see, angles. Okay, if you think about if you split the head in two on where the strainer would be. So if you imagine an imaginary line on the batter head, that's directly parallel with the snare strainer. What you want to do is you want to back the muffle strip back up a little bit. I think about it as 2/5 of the way across the drum, if that makes sense. So the muffle strip will always be parallel with the snare strainer, but it will be back away from the center. So maybe it's only a few inches. I kind of do it by eye these days. But yeah, so if you see where the seam and the snare strainer would be directly underneath this badge right here, it's just backed off a little bit, because if it's too close to the center, it's gonna muffle it too much. And especially if you're using a Kevlar head, they tend to have a lot of self-muffling anyway. So what I personally do on a lot of drums is I take this out entirely and just have a smaller thing that goes on the top, which I could show you that in a bit too. But we're not going to go there yet. So let's see, I don't need that anymore. So our bottom head. everything's nice and fitted. See, this is the first time I'm going to see this drum together too, so this is kind of cool. So if the drum that you're working on is a Cooperman or a Loyal drum, it'll have a strike plate, and the strike plate is not installed on this drum yet, but it would be right here. It's just a small either stainless steel plate or a bronze plate that's right here glued on right above the, or right below the snare gate rather. So this is always in alignment with the strainer that has the adjustment screw, and the badge for Cooperman was a number plate that was right up above the bracket and the vent hole. So all these things are always in line. And from there, we go to whatever type of carry you would have on this drum. So this one is actually, it's cut for the military carry, which I didn't put one on the table here to show you, but it's the flat plate with the hole in it. So it's countersunk and all that here, but it gives you an indicator of where that carry is. And in most cases, there's going to be a very specific point for that carry. There are a few exceptions. People who like to have a drum completely vertically in front of them would have to shift things around, but this is for the standard style of marching with the drum, you know, at the slant, is going to follow this rule. So we have this line with the snare strainer, and we're going to go up to this hole directly above it, one over, and then half, and that's where any of the carries are going to be. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, I'm assuming yes. So we always want to have this position for the hoops to be in alignment with the shell. So last thing we need to do is prep our ears. We've prepped our rope, we have our muffle strip, we have everything together. For a new set of ears, this will be more important than if you're reassembling an older drum, or something that's already been used a few times. I actually had this conversation with somebody just the other day. He said, "Did you make my ears for a smaller rope?" And the answer is no. Which these are made to be tight. It's good for them to be tight because they work better at tensioning the drum. The closer you get that rope together, the more tension it's going to be providing. So if you see them where the ropes are really spread out just above the ear, that's not the most ideal situation. So sometimes if you have a really stubborn ear, then you want to use something like this, and you can use all kinds of different things. You can use a Sharpie if you want to, something that's has a slight taper to it. This is a fid that we make in the shop. We got a couple of these, but just to give a little bit of relief to the top of that hole right there is going to open up the passage essentially for the rope to travel through. So with that, I think we're ready to start stringing up this drum. So you can do this on a table pretty easily, but I'm actually going to show it to you on the drum press, just because I think it'll be a little bit more clear. I'll be able to get things more into frame here with the camera. So I'm going to shift things around a little bit, and we'll get this set up.
So David, you are shuffling around. Would you be able to answer a question? What brand and thickness head do you use on the snare side?
So the snare heads that we use on the snare side are they're custom made for us by Remo. They're emperor weight snare side emperor weight, if that makes sense. So the difference between that is it's not the same as the batter weight snare sides, or sorry, the batter weight emperor heads. So I think it's it's 4 mil, something like that. And the Swiss Melinex heads that we also use and sell are about 3 mil, so a little bit thinner.
And we got one more question coming in as you were putting your stuff together. How big is this drum? How much rope do you need for this size drum?
This is a 16 by 16 and it's 45 feet. A 17 by 17 would be 48 feet. You know, and it kind of varies around there, with the really tall drums being somewhere around 55 feet. Okay. People kind of know me for not being a huge fan of drum presses, which isn't entirely true. I think that they're used sometimes in ways that they shouldn't be, and so that very few people actually benefit from a drum press, and it's not necessary for most people to have. If you're maintaining 10 drums or something like that, I think it's going to make a lot more sense for you to have something like this. This is a little bit different than most drum presses that you'll see. You know, it's a shop fixture more than anything. It's not something that we sell. We do sell some drum presses, but they're not like this. This is more of a shop fixture. And we actually designed this one as a roping press. So it wasn't actually designed as a drum press. And then we figured out that it works better than any drum press that I've ever seen. So this is a pretty cool tool for us to be able to use in the shop. So I'm just gonna, all this is gonna do is hold it together so that I can maneuver around and be able to show you everything. So again, this is a roping press. I think this has to be the only one in the world because we just designed it last year. But so we have that position of the strike plate, the strainer, the carry. Everything is in line. We don't need to worry too much about these holes being exactly in the right place yet, because we'll be able to kind of mess around with that after it gets roped. So I have some rules about roping a drum that I think alleviate 99% of all the issues that people tend to have with the rope. There's a few things to keep in mind. One is that whichever direction the rope originally went on when the drum was manufactured, it always has to go in that same way. And the reason for that is because the rope never sits directly up and down on the holes, right? So it always goes over on one side and then back, you know, and then through the hole on the other side. So if you reverse that, then this rope is always going to be abrasive enough that it's gonna more or less carve a channel into the hoop. And so if you reverse that, then you always have a visible channel no matter what side you go on. So it's best just to always do it the exact same way that it was done. And if you're working on an old molar, that can be kind of frustrating, but also kind of funny because he tended to use different rope directions, you know, because of the different swells in the hoop. So we would actually put them on the outsides of the snare beds and all that. So it was kind of an interesting thing. So directly to the right of the snare strainer system is where we're going to start the rope. This is where the PigTail is going to be. This is where the eye-splice is going to be. So I always do things in threes. Okay, so we do three things at the same time. So, and what this is going to do is actually reduce friction and things like that. So we always go, here's rule number one, you always go around and through, okay? So unless the drum was made differently, if it's accoutrement, if it's a loyal drums, it's always going to be around and through, okay? So we start by going around and through so that it's coming out the front, right? And then the second thing is we always put an ear on immediately, okay? In the old guard, I remember one of our drummers put his entire drum together and then realized that he didn't have ears on it after it was tensioned and everything. So that's kind of a famous, funny story for us. This is the most efficient way to do this that I've ever found, though. So you start it through the ear, and then you always maintain control of the end of the rope, okay? If you let this go, if you let it flop to the floor, you're gonna have, it's gonna happen to you. You're gonna have an issue where something's twisted, or the rope is kind of knotted into itself, and you're going to have to backtrack. If you follow this, you'll never have to backtrack. So as long as you have control of the end of that rope and you can just grab it from there, then it's good to go. So, and again, you can do this on a table. It's not necessary to have some sort of drum press for this operation. So we always do, let's see, two things at the same time, okay? These holes, we can call them a 45 degree. They're not actually 45 degrees, but they do have a direction that kind of goes in this way. So what we want to do is we want to reduce friction. Friction is one of our biggest issues with both getting paint onto the ropes themselves, damaging hoops, and anything in the middle, so especially on a historic drum, we definitely want to reduce the friction as much as possible. And that doesn't mean that we have to go slow. We can go pretty quick with this. We just need to do it in a way that it's pulling the rope through the hole without scraping against everything else. So what I do is I hold the drum ear at about a 45-degree angle away from that. And I use that as something that is guiding that rope okay? So now I can just grab this rope because I know that it's in the right place. I don't need to think about, okay, did it twist? Did it get into its own way? And now I can do the same thing. I can pull. If you were doing this on the table, I would normally throw all of this rope up onto the top of the head so that then it's coming directly back down through the hole and again reducing friction. So from this point, we're going to do the same thing in the reverse direction. And I might be going quick here, but hopefully you guys get the idea. I do have to put an entire drum together. So we want to get it to, let me get some of that there. We want to do two things at the same time. So now I'm holding the ear at about a 45-degree angle going this way. And now I can just pull as fast as I want because I'm not creating enough friction to damage the hoop or the rope. So it just twists out. Right. You always just want to have it a little bit snug, but you definitely don't want to have any tension on this. That's when you're going to start having the hoops fall off of the drum if you're doing this on a table. So I'm just going to keep going here. I can answer some questions if you guys have any so far while I'm doing this.
All right, if anybody has a question, feel free to put it up in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, there is a, if you hover over your name and click on, nope, that's not it, I apologize. If you click on the more button underneath all the chat, you'll see a thumbs down, a thumbs up, clap your hands. Where's the raise hand? Why can't I find it, Scott?
They moved it under reactions.
Oh, thank you. You can click on reactions. Anyways, type it in the chat. So, Sammy has a question. How do you protect the edge of the hoop from friction?
So the angle that we're pulling the rope through is really what's protecting it from the actual roping process. There are some European drums that have an actual metal piece under them, but I don't think it's necessary for these drums. What you want to do, you're going to allow it to have friction, but you just want to have it in a spot where it's always going to be hidden. So you never want to see that friction. If you look at an old set of hoops, something like 50 years old, 100 years old, something like that, you might see, actually, let me grab one for you. Here's an old Soisman hoop. And you can see that over time, I don't know if he made them like that or if that's just the friction from over time, but you can see that it definitely wears in. And if you were to reverse the direction that rope was going, you can see that it's at kind of an angle here. If you reverse the direction, the angle would be on the other side. So then you would always see this. But if you put this together the way that it is and follow the original, instructions that the hoop is giving you, then you won't have an issue with that because it'll be covered.
All right. With natural ropes, do you like pre-stretching the rope before roping the drum?
I would prefer to. We actually do pre-stretch the ropes on the drums here, but you know, if you had, I know that is that from David?
Yes.
I get it. Okay. I definitely know the story about I forget who it was, but you know, soaking the ropes in the bathtub for hours and hours, and then stretching it against a telephone pole with your truck. That's all great. Which I mean, it's I'd love to be able to do that, but it's just not something that I can do on every. I think my neighbors here in the industrial park might get a little upset if I just had ropes stretching between trucks all the time. So, but it's not a bad idea. We always pull the drum, pull the ears down for maybe a day or so, and then pull the drum again. Um, Normally, it takes a couple pulls to actually get the full stretch out of the rope. Um, you know, we get a benefit from this rope because it only stretches 2%. So, you know, if you're working with a rope that stretches 30%, then it's going to take a lot longer to get to that maximum stretch. In the old guard, we would do, I think, three pulls if we did a new rope on a drum or a set of drums. So 3 pulls over the course of like 2 weeks, just to make sure that they always, you know, were at their full stretch when they went out on performance.
All right. Thank you for that. How about the ears? Do you prefer leather or a mix of leather and metal ears?
So that's kind of the leather and metal were a thing back in the like 1890s, I guess. I might be wrong about some of the dates on that, but I know I've seen them on historic drums from around that time period. They're all fine and good. There's nothing wrong with either one of them. You know, it's a neat idea. Nobody's really making that at the moment. We do have some technology that we're putting into ears, but I'm not ready to talk about that in this. But it's not far off from that idea. So yeah, it's fine either way. If you have those ears, you might as well use them. A lot of those clip onto the rope, so it makes it a little bit quicker to rope the drum. And these tend to go much faster. When you first start off roping a drum, it's going to feel like you're moving them, 5 miles an hour. But as you get less and less rope, it gets faster and faster.
Related to ears, is there a way to rejuvenate old ears that have hardened?
That have parted, yes. I mean, so that would be relacing the ears. And I don't think that we're going to have time to cover that today, but I can certainly do a follow-up video at some point of that process. If you're talking about the lace parting is what I'm assuming. So the lace, if it's going to split, it's going to tend to split right here at the bottom, because that's where the majority of the pressure is going to be right there at the bottom. So if it's going to split, it's going to be here. If the actual leather is splitting, then that's something you would just need a new ear. But the lace can be retied. Not the same lace. You would need a piece of rawhide for that. It's kind of a thing. But I will say about ears, if you have a drum that has some older ears, and let's see what I do. You want to make sure that the backs of the ears are tucked in, right? So this is the front of the ear, and this is the back, right? So I've seen some over the years that have just been tied back here. Rawhide can be extremely sharp, and you can run into having the issue of scratching the finish on your drum much easier than you might think. So, if the ear's too thick, or if you have rawhide lace that has not been tucked in, we actually tuck these on the inside of the ear, and then it's all glued down, so that both ends are captivated inside here, so that they're not going to scratch.
All right, more ear questions. Does Loyal offer specialty ears to match drums that somebody has from the 1800s?
We do we have probably 6 or 7 different types of ears at the moment. I'm sure that there's something that we have that's from the correct time period for different for a drum like that. We do sometimes do a custom ear, but it's kind of for special projects. Like we just built a remake of a Soisman, an old guard Soisman actually. And for that one, we did a special set of ears that were copied from an original Soisman ear. I also did replacement molar ears in that style. So it's possible. But we probably have something that's going to be appropriate. That's based off of an original from any of the time periods that you're looking for. Any more questions about ears?
Not at the moment. I'm just scrolling back up through my big list of questions. There is one, not ear related. Zoom is not being helpful to me. Okay, here we go. Best cleaning products for washing any hoop paint off of rope without wearing it down.
So there's a few things that you can do. One of them is that just try to reduce the amount of friction that you're putting on the same stuff that we've been saying. If you can wash rope actually, so it has to come back off the drum obviously, but you can wash rope if you get one of those mesh laundry bags. You can use bleach in the washing machine with the rope inside that laundry bag. It will put the you will need to re-stretch the ropes though. That is something that you'll have to do afterwards. On the drum is fine. You don't need to do it with a truck, David Nelson style. But yeah. So, but if you wanted to touch them up on the drum themselves, something you could do is whitewash pickling actually, which that does work. You could also try some denatured alcohol, something like that. Depending on the finish that's on your drum, you do have to be careful. The finishes that we use are impervious to almost everything. I think the only thing that they have a very good rating against is sulfuric acid, and everything else is like excellent ratings. So if it's one of ours, you can clean it with, you don't have to be too worried about the chemicals that you use. But especially for an older finish, you want to be careful. If it has shellac on it, you wouldn't want to use, a denatured alcohol because that's what dissolves shellac. So you don't want to run into any of those issues. But if you did want to touch it up, whitewash pickling, which you can get that at any hardware store, is a decent product for it. This is my last one, and then we can pull a drum.
All right, well, let's add you 2 quick questions and see how fast you can answer them. I'm going to read this one directly. Soisman changed the bottom of the V part of the rope pattern every other 2 holes on the bottom, and on the batter hoop, the pattern would face in and then out. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like it's a totally fine thing, and what that would do is just kind of put what he's describing is that this wouldn't be over, it would be over, under, over. And it's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it for sure. I would almost consider it more of a decoration. And if the drum was built like that, then I would say keep doing it, right? Like there's no reason to change it. But if it's a cool thing, and Moeller was kind of similar as well. So we have a put together drum. It looks like a drum anyway. So was there another question?
There is, and hopefully, I think this might be a quick one. Is the same glue for the laced ears the hide glue?
No, so we use a high heat, high strength hot glue for that. It's kind of an industrial product, but you could probably do it with regular hot glue and be just fine. I do prefer hot glue for the ears though, to seal those down, just because it's it's flexible. It stays flexible for a long time. I wouldn't want to use cyanoacrylate glue like the super glue, because it's a very what's the word, very brittle. So it's gonna crack over time on an ear where it's getting constant use. Okay, so I did want to talk about not everybody has a drum press, and one of the reasons I don't think that people really need a drum press. I've seen 3 drums get destroyed on drum presses before, and it's not something that I like to see. So I try to be realistic with people about if they need one or not. For I'd say about half the drums that we do in the shop, we don't even use this press. We might use it to rope, but we don't pull it on this press. We'll pull it by hand, because you can actually get a drum tighter by hand than you can with a drum press. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is true, and it has nothing to do with strength or anything like that. It's all about technique. And the reason for it is that when you press down on this, you're creating a lot of tension, and if you overpress that, if you don't have enough strength to pull the ropes to that same level that you had, say, a hydraulic jack, one of those, the kind of normal drum press, then when you undo that jack, you'll hear a creaking sound, and what that means is you've overstretched the head, and then it actually ends up a little bit looser than it could have been because you've overstretched the head, and then you weren't able to put that much pressure onto the ropes by hand anyway. So one of the biggest benefits of a drum press is that it holds everything there for you. But you can do it in several different ways. Do we have enough time to pull this drum in 2 different ways, Corinne?
I think so. I mean, this was slated for 90 minutes. I think a 30-minute QA may have been overambitious. Plus, we're doing the QA during, so I think it is fine because we do have a question as you're doing this. When pressing a drum without a press, how do you know when to stop and can you overdo it? So if you could show us the different ways.
Yeah. So sure. Let me actually start. Let me not use the drum press at all because everything else kind of goes off of the same methodology. With the drum press, I mean, you would do everything that I'm going to do on the other methods anyway, so it should be fine. One thing you always want to do after you do get the drum roped up is you want to make sure that everything is nice and that it hasn't shifted. If you're doing this on a table, it might have a tendency more to shift, but so a good way to tell is by pulling an ear down. There's only one caveat to that. You don't want to pull the ear down over the snare strainer because of the way that the rope goes through the eye-splice. It's actually different. Maybe it doesn't matter. Just use a different ear because then you can actually tell the vertical line. You can use a tool to do this. You can use some sort of L square or something like that if you'd like to, or you can just kind of line it up by eye. I tend to do it by eye, just with one ear to make sure that everything is forming a nice triangle and that you have your clearances all set up for the snare gates, which are these cutouts. Cool. So let's do it. I want to show you the more traditional way to do a historic drum. All right, I got the table here. All right, you can see. Good. Since I have this sitting right here, I do want to just I get asked this all of the time, and I figure it'd be good just to show you. If you don't have a carry on the drum, if something's broken or it's an older drum and you don't have a carry, when you're roping the drum, you can take a ring, right? You can get this at any hardware store, and put them on you can either have it up here, or you could have both ropes go through it while you're lacing the drum. It works really well. I've got several drums that I've made for myself that I just use this. I'm kind of simple when it comes to things. I like to, just have the drum sound good. But yeah, so It actually works excellent. It's a great technique if you don't have a carry, if it's a historic drum or something like that, and it doesn't change the drum either. So it's a nice way to do it. So if you guys have the Cooperman manual for pulling a drum, this is going to be roughly that same, maybe with a little bit of a variation to it. But one of the big things, we're still fighting a little bit of friction here, but we also don't want to have these uneven. So I'm sure we've all seen the roller coaster hoop effect where, you know, this side is cranked down, this side is not so much, and it creates this big dip from the pressure of the ropes. So if we think about this whole thing, okay, we have a loop on one side, we have the rope going all the way around and then coming back through that loop from the other side, right? So the only thing that can possibly create that to happen is either pulling the drum super tight from here while this side is loose, which shifts everything over, or having this eye-splice, which, remember, I didn't seal it, and this drum's coming back apart anyway, so it wouldn't look like this, it'd be all sealed up. But having this locked up against there. So we actually don't want to have that locked up against there, because that's creating a hard point where when you're pulling the tension onto the rope, it's not going to allow it to kind of equalize between the two, right? So we can leave a little bit of slack there, just a little bit's fine. We just want to start getting this, more or less getting the slack out of the drum. We're not even really trying to do too much of anything here. And this, as I said, this is kind of a good way for any historic drums, any fragile drums. You know, it's a fine way to do it for any drum, really. But you know, this is just one of the methods. So for the first couple, I just wedge the rope underneath the first one, right? You can put a little bit more. What I tend to do is I always transfer the slack from the rope. So I'm holding the slack here, and I transfer it up instead of just letting go and grabbing this. I transfer that up, and then I pull down while I'm transferring this slack around as well. And you can use your hand to kind of brace against it and kind of give it a push, which helps out quite a bit. So I'm not even doing very much. Again, we want to take small bites with this. The slower we can move that tension around the rope or around the drum, actually the better, the more consistent it's going to be around the top, so that we're not having tight spots and loose spots. So now what I want to do is I want to actually, here's my starting point, there's where my eye-splice is. I want to go back a few, or go like to the beginning a few, and I'm going to pull in the opposite direction a little bit. This might be a little controversial, but by doing that, I've created slack on the eye-splice side, right? So that this is no longer locked up against that position. And then I can pull down from there, so I've taken the slack out from this side as well. Because remember, at the beginning, I put a little bit in there. So we have control over the ends here. Let me show you why this is an interesting point about pulling a drum. Is if you have rope that doesn't stretch very much, then it's not a challenge really this is not a tight drum by any means. We still have some wrinkles and things like that, but you know, it's definitely playable, even just from those 2 times around. And the funny thing is that since this rope hasn't had its first stretch yet, I can even just do that now because it's already hit that stretch. But, you know, it's still tight, so it doesn't look like it, but with rope that doesn't stretch, it's actually a lot tighter than you think. So doing that several more times around, you're going to keep on pulling that tension out. The biggest thing that's a challenge for people with this is the actual eye-splice, or the pigtail here. So as we continue pulling this around until the drum is getting nice and tight, you can do this 5, 10, 15 times even, which is not a problem. Take your time with it and just keep on taking little bites. But we want to make sure that all that tension stays off the drum. If I just let go of this, then sorry, my air compressor, then that tension is going to pull some slack back into the drum. So we don't want that. So we use the pigtail, right? So I can actually stop this rope. You can hear me over the air compressor, right? Okay. Cool. So I can stop this rope just with a finger. It's not going to slide back and forth because I have all the friction going around that eye-splice, and then I can just push against it right there and be just fine. Now, the way that the pigtail works is based on the idea that if I twist the rope this way, it opens up the strands, and if I twist it this way, it closes down until it creates a buckle. If you see how it buckles into itself right there, that's the whole premise. So we don't want to do it all the way out here because then we would have all that distance to need to make up for with the loops of the pigtail. So we want to get it as close as we possibly can. We want it to be right up on top, right there. We see? So it's right against that loop. And then if we keep on putting tension on here, we can loop it around and pull it behind. So that first buckle has created more or less a hard knot, if you will, or a hard spot in the rope, where now every loop that you put behind that is actually going to push that farther and farther away from the drum.
Is there a guideline on how many times around?
I mean, as many times as you need to until the drum is where you need it to be. Really, it's gonna vary for everybody, depending on how much they can pull on each each time around, and you do it by feel more or less. If you feel the tension on the ropes here and it feels a lot different over here, if it's a lot looser, then I would say you need to keep pulling. One of the ways that I always teach it, though, is to you never from this point we haven't continued to pull the drum because I wanted to show you the way that we're going to lock that off. But I would probably pull this another 4 or 5 times to get it to where I'd want the tension, but in small chunks. So I'm doing it more to as we said in the Army, train to standard, not train to time. Or train to time, not standard. I forget which one. but yeah, so it's not really based on a number. It's based on the tension coming off of the drum. So yeah.
A question about tension, specific to the pigtail. So, does the pigtail add tension to both sides of the rope? Does a pigtail add tension to both rope sides, or just really the side you're finishing the pull on?
So since we have unlocked this, it's unlocked, meaning that it's not butted up right up against the other side. It has a better chance of equalizing between the two. That's a benefit to us. That means that we're not going to have so much of a tight side and the loose side. You're creating a tighter part in the rope, but since there's nothing holding it back, it shouldn't move on you, or it should equalize as much as possible. Cool. So I'm going to put a few more pulls on this drum, but I want to show you a different technique as well. So I know we're working with one drum and we're kind of having to go quick here. So I want to show you the method that I'm sure we've all seen it before, and some of us really hate it. But it's by using your feet. There's a safe way to do this and a very unsafe way to do it. So I'm hopefully going to show you the safe way. So I've got my drum shop shoes covered in red stain. I've got my serge socks on. So I actually have specific drum pulling socks for this, but we don't do this method really in the drum shop, but it's something that a lot of people do in the field when they don't have access to a drum press or even a table. If you need to get some quick tension on the drum, it is an okay way to do it. I would not do this on a historic drum. I would do this on, you know, a drum that's made by me, you know, a Cooperman, pretty much something contemporary that's been built like a tank, essentially, because you could damage a drum if you did this incorrectly. So the idea is, you see a lot of people put their actual heels inside of the hoop to hold the drum down. All we're trying to do is maintain that drum in the same position. All the pressure comes from our hands. We're not using our legs to push out. But I actually don't put my heels in here. What I do is I grab the entire drum using the inside of my knee, kind of the fatty part below your knee, and then using my ankles to be right there, if you can even see it, right there on that hoop, right? It's not the most comfortable thing in the world, but it works out pretty well, and you can also use your toes if you need to. But now we can actually keep that drum steady, and with small chunks that we're taking out of this, this is really where it comes in handy to be able to tie a single-handed eye-splice. PigTail, rather. So I just locked it back in. And one more bite. I'm going to skip a few, though. So this was my starting point. This is where I started pulling from. But to keep that from becoming too tight while everything else stays a little bit looser, I'm going to skip maybe 2 or 3. I do it by feel. And with this, I'm never pushing against the shell. It's kind of like an egg. If you squeeze an egg from the top versus if you squeeze it from the side. So you never push on the shell, you're pulling from the entire drum.
When you really start getting it tight, do you ever reset the eye-splice again, or do you just leave it?
So I'm assuming that means would I try to back it up again? And the answer is, if it needed to be. Most of the time, it's not going to happen. After that first time that you kind of reset things, if it's under a little bit of tension, it shouldn't creep back up. But if it did, then you could always pull back a little bit, or just, you could pull the drum entirely the other direction now, if you wanted to. But that's good enough for me. So if you feel the ropes when you do this, you should feel the consistency between them. Or you might go back and do the last 3, the last 4, kind of wherever you need to. Another good way to take a look at it is wrinkles on the head. So you can see that most of the head doesn't have wrinkles. There are a few over the snare beds, but that's just because we haven't hit it with the heat gun yet. But we can see that this right here, which is very close to the eye-splice, needs a little bit more pull.
Dave, if there's an opportunity, could you do the locking thing one more time and get a little bit closer to the camera?
Which locking thing? Which? Oh, just how I stop the rope before I.
I believe so. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're about to do it anyway. So.
Yes, that is what was meant.
So, I got rid of those wrinkles. There's still a few around the snare bed because that's where the shell is kind of cut away for the snares to go. Cool. So this drum is tight enough for me. Let's see. So a better view for this, again, disregard that. I would normally seal it. This is also the way that I end up after the pigtail is completely done. So I normally go under this rope. You can tie a knot though, if you need to. What I would do is a half hitch. So that's not going anywhere. That's a single half hitch, and that'll hold the pigtail from unraveling itself, and that'll stay for forever. So one thing about the pigtails, we don't want to see a ton of loops. If you can see, if this pigtail is like, 3 inches long, then you didn't get the drum tight enough, right? So you could put more tension on the drum. Instead of trying to make this thing stick out like here, you're just going to trip people. And the last step, because I know we're running a little bit short on time, is to do the drag rope. So the drag rope, you can find this again on YouTube or something. It's not the most complex thing in the world. There are several different types that we've done in the past, but this is kind of the standard traditional drag rope. You can look it up under daisy chain, something like that. So it's a simple slip knot, and then it's, the way that I teach it is you imagine the front of your hand in this loop. You never get your whole hand through here because then you won't be able to do this method. But this hand, your left hand, if you're right-handed, controls the slack of that loop. So you want to make it as small as possible, then grab and pull it through. So small as possible, grab, pull. So you can get pretty quick with this, especially if you have the drum being held by somebody or secured in some other way. But the more consistently you pull that tension, the more consistent the drag rope is going to be. And then to finish it off, all you do is pull the rest of the rope through, right? So that was 45 feet on a 16 by 16. And it's pretty much perfect. I would actually do a few more here. But so on the far side of the drum, directly across from it, you don't need any kind of crazy knot here. What you actually want to do is just wedge it in this taller part of the rope where it can actually sit up there. And then I reverse it. So if you see, this kind of creates ridges right in the middle here on the drag rope. You're going to pick one side and you're going to start weaving the rope back through. So this way you don't have any ugly knots.
So Dave, as you're doing that, there's a question that says, why not Dutch?
You could do that. So Dutching is, that's when you actually turn these over like this and put a rope going straight through here. It's kind of an older method. I'll get to a reason in just a second here. Let me get a few more of these, but I want to show you something with the ears. I don't think it helps you out is the ultimate answer. I think that the drum just needs to be tightened because the height that the ear can travel actually increases the amount of tension that you can put on the drum. We'll leave this just like that, but you can see it makes it a little bit thicker. It doesn't change the look entirely. This is the single, and that's where it's already been doubled back. But I would bring this all the way back here and trim it. But even if you left it here, because it doesn't have tape, it doesn't have anything that discolors it, it just kind of blends into this entire finished look of the drum. So what I was saying about the ears and the distance that they can travel, if you see the kind of shape of this ear, both the lacing and the edge of the ear make kind of a triangle, right? And I see ears that have been pulled down as far as humanly possible. And then people wonder why their ears slip up. And they ask about putting rosin on the ears and all these different things to keep the ears from slipping up. The simple answer is that geometry is about where, you can go a little bit past that geometry, but that's about where you want that rope to be. right? So if I went much farther past that,
I was going to say, can you angle the camera? Yeah, thank you.
If I went much farther past that, then we're creating more pressure in the upwards direction because this rope is going to be like this. So it's going to want to push that ear up. So the drum just needs more tension. But if you did Dutch the ropes, which I think that's the term that where you actually pinch these and have a rope going through, you're shortening the height. Right now it can work all the way from here to here. And if you do that, then you've shortened the height. And so you'll have less movement of the ears where they're actually going to be the most effective, which is based on that geometry. Does that make sense?
That does. It's all like the physics. We also have a comment that says Dutching is also called S-turns. And quick question related to this ropes. What is the purpose of the drag rope?
Well, a few things. Depending, one, it looks cool. I think it looks cool. But historically, you could throw the drum over your shoulder, like on a long march or something like that. You could, it can hang down below the drum. But it's a nice way to complete the, use the excess rope. If you're playing on calfskin heads, historically, those heads would get stretched out, especially if you're, in weather and stuff like that. So you don't want to keep cutting your rope back because then you won't have enough when you have a brand new set of heads. So it gives you some extra rope. It gives you a nice finished look, and then also acts as a strap where you can throw it over your shoulder if you needed to. Okay, last little tip, because I know we're running out of time here. One thing I always do before I play, if your drum doesn't sound that great, or it's just been sitting around for a while, and you've waxed your bearing edges, things that you should probably be doing, give the drum a little bit of CPR, okay? And I do this almost every time that when I pick up my drum, I'll tension it, and once it's tensioned, I just give it a little bit of CPR. And what that does is it kind of resets, it kind of breaks the head away from the bearing edge if it's gotten kind of stuck in there. So it breaks that away, and it's going to make the drum sound better, almost always. Same thing for the bottom, you can do both. I'm not pushing it incredibly hard, I'm just giving it a little bit of love. I know we didn't cover everything, but I know that we're also limited on time. So do we have any questions about some of this stuff? Anything else you want me to?
There's a few questions that have come through. And first one, I will stick with rope. Are there any historic examples of double drag ropes that you're aware of?
I've seen them. I've seen a lot in Europe. I'm not sure how historically accurate they are. I've seen a bunch of museums though. You can do all kinds of different things with rope. People have been, decorating with rope in the nautical traditions for, hundreds and hundreds of years. So, I think it would be perfectly safe to say that there were all kinds of variations that people did.
Excellent. What kind of wax do you use for the bearing edge?
So we actually blend our own here. You can use, I actually did have that on the table. So in a pinch, you could use something like paste wax, or you could use even a candle. There's a candle everywhere on the planet, so I'm sure that you could find a candle. But you want something. This one's a little dirty. You want something that's just gonna give a little bit of relief of the friction. So especially on a calfskin head, you definitely need to have your calfskin heads. Your bearing edges waxed for a calfskin, but you don't want to use something that's too thin or that takes too long to dry, like a paste wax necessarily, unless you give it some time, because you don't want that to transfer onto the skin and start penetrating into the skin itself. For a mylar head, for a plastic head, Kevlar, you don't need to worry too much. You can do a bunch of different things, but a candle should be fine. We mix our own with, let's see, beeswax and paste wax and some other things, which works pretty well. There's even some linseed oil in there. But yeah, so, any sort of wax should be, better than nothing.
And then what type of bearing edge do you prefer and why?
So for a rope drum, I like it to be a little bit more, let's let's see, we actually use a 60-degree on a lot of our stuff. You can't really see it too well on this one. Let's see, I'm looking around for, can I find a drum? Are there drums around? I don't know. But yeah, so the more rounded bearing edges are going to increase the amount of, vibrations that are moving through the shell. So the sound of the shell is going to translate a little bit more, where a sharper bearing edge is going to translate more of the head sound. So we like to have a fairly dull bearing edge, and there's a little bit of a difference between the top and the bottom, but fairly dull gives a better sound for this style of instrument.
Do you have a recommendation or different recommendations for calf heads versus synthetic?
I love calf. I absolutely love calf, but
For the bearing edge, sorry.
oh, for the bearing edge, I would definitely try not to go too sharp on a calf, especially on a calf. For the obvious reason that it's going to be, easier to break, but I think the sound is also going to translate pretty well on the semi-rounded bearing edge. I'm not talking about like full-on baseball bats. I'm talking about like a little bit nicer. Let's see. I might actually have one that I can grab. I don't want to get piled with drums. So.
All right. So, go ahead.
No.
All right. At this point, I think this is a decent stopping point for right now. I'm not saying we're, ending this and everybody out the door. But if anybody had anything coming up next, feel free to scoot off. And Dave, if you need to run, to let us know. But I think now might be a good time. I will unspotlight you. So that way everybody can see everybody who's talking. But there have been a few different questions, sort of we've had some sounds about, how does the thickness of gut strands affect the sounds, and can you offer tips or tricks for that? So maybe people, if you want to take maybe the next 15 minutes and sort of just open this up to general questions related to, drum maintenance and optimization. Does that sound like a fair plan?
Yeah. I have some time to stay here and answer some questions. Yeah, for sure.
All right, so how about we start with those two that just came through, which is how does the thickness of gut strands affect the sounds? And do you have any tips or tricks you can offer about experimenting with snare gut tensions to optimize sound besides just where it sounds best?
Yeah, so that's I would love to do an entire video just on that stuff as well. I know that we kind of ran out of time on this with with roping and pulling the drums to get too much into the snares, but that is the next big topic here is how do we do those adjustments for the thickness of the snares. I mean it's kind of obvious, like having thinner snares they're going to be more sensitive. Different types of snares you can use, combinations of different types, which we've started to do on some drums. And so, having some wire, having some thinner gauge gut and some thicker gauge gut, you have to have the right kind of setup on the drum to be able to do that. What we use, this is one of our, newer pieces for the strainers. So it's done with set screws. So you can have a variety of different things in here with double strands per hole, which allows you to do things like, those different types of materials. But yeah, so the larger gut, I do like large gut. It responds really well playing loud, which I like to play loud. So, it's really good for that, but you lose a lot of sensitivity with it as well. So, if you are going to have super large gut, then you definitely want to potentially have something smaller in there as well. Yeah, and tension with those, just to cover that really quick, because I know that was the other part of the question. The tension of the snare gut, individually speaking, well, first off, let me say that most people have their snares too tight. Most of the time, if you should be backing them off, and I like the method of playing double taps, tut-up, 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 while you tighten it up until you hit that sweet spot. Over choked off snares, tend to not to not sound very good at all. I did have a Soisman that used to sound great when I choked it off, but you know, it was a kind of a unique drum there. But yeah, so but with the actual individual tension on the snares, they they should be within the feel of each other. So the feel of pulling on the snares, you should be able to have a roughly even tension there. I don't think that they need to be micrometer accuracy with that tension, because I think that if they are a little bit off, it actually might benefit you, because the drum will respond at some different frequency ranges and you know, some different dynamics as well.
So is there a common cause and or a fix for a drum that quote rings?
Yeah, so there's a few things that can be happening there. I mean, one is obviously muffling. You know, you can muffle a drum from the bottom, from the top. Let me show you what I was talking about earlier. Something super simple. We've all seen the wallet on top of somebody's drum, but we do these thick pieces of suede that can just, you know, drop right into the edge there, which can muffle down a drum. Another thing about ringing is the actual bearing edge. If it's not flat, then the drum is going to ring. So you can, if you have an older drum, something that's not flat, you can check it up against a, you know, like a granite countertop or something like that, with a flashlight on the inside, and you can refine it with sandpaper, hopefully on something that's very flat, like a piece of granite. And yeah, so once you stop seeing the light through there, then that's going to mean that your bearing edge is more flat, so that you're not going to have as much ringing. But first step is probably the muffling. Just tighten the muffler.
Okay, so do you, still talking about heads, do you ever try to tuck calf heads double layered?
Like 2 pieces of calf on the same flesh hoop?
I don't have that clarification. My thought was wrapped around twice.
So we go, I guess, 1.5 times. Let's see. Flesh hoop comes over, goes around, tucks in, and then tucks back out to the outside. If that makes sense.
We've got a correction. No 2 layers.
Like actual 2 layers. I've never done it. I've never heard of it being done. I would imagine that you'd have an issue with, you know, the heads moving at different speeds, especially if there's humidity affecting one and not the other. Yeah, I've never even heard of it, so I don't have any personal opinion on it.
All right. So I've got 2 questions that were asked earlier. One, we're getting back to the, so somebody had a drum that had been roped before the oil paint on the hoop had fully dried. Is there a way of getting that off? The solution of the drum maker was to paint over the red spots in white, which gave a nice hue of pink.
Yeah, so get a new rope. I would say put a new rope on the drum. I mean, that's or wash that one actually. I mean, that's probably the best first trial is take that rope off and wash it. I think you're talking about getting rid of the paint that's on the rope, not not trying to repair the actual hoop.
Yeah, this was what we were talking about, rope.
Yeah. So so definitely give it a whirl. Just don't use more bleach than the bottle says to. We've done that mistake before, and then you get green rope. So definitely follow the instructions on the bleach, you know, for a load of wash, and you know, try that out. Unless if it's hemp or something, then yeah, don't do that. But if it's a synthetic, better, you know, try it out and see what happens.
All right, and this may be the what is your favorite drum to work on these days?
Mm.
You can pass.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing, because I love working on my molar, just for the history of it. You know, and I think that sounds like a David Nelson question, because we have somewhat sister drums in a way. But
It was not Dave.
okay. I mean, I really love making new drums. I mean, making these drums. You know, I spend a lot of time here, and a lot of hard hours, and I, you know, bleed and sweat in the shop, and not on drums, but but yeah, I mean, like just being able to make, you know, like the drums that we have currently that we're working on, and there's more pretty much everywhere throughout this whole place. Um, yeah, seeing something come out of the hard work is by far the most gratifying for me. So.
All right, so I am going to thank everybody now. I think we've reached a sort of a good pause point. And thank everybody for coming today, and really thank you, Dave. This has been super informative. I mean, I know I come from the sort of Pfeiffer perspective of drums make noise, hurt my ears, but I've found this just really great for myself. And I know I saw a lot of comments coming through the chat that people have really appreciated this. If people want to get in touch with you, if they have some more questions or any specific questions, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
So you can always go to the website loyaldrums.com. You can reach us out to us on Facebook, Instagram. I prefer Facebook over Instagram. Or shoot me an email, loyaldrums@gmail.com, and we'll go from there.